Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.
Welcome, everybody, to ProductivityCast, episode number 35. And I'm Ray Sidney Smith. I'm joined here today with Augusto Pinaud, my co-host. How's it going, Augusto?
Good morning, everybody.
And I'm also joined by Francis Wade. How's it going, Francis?
Good.
And I'm joined by Art Gelwicks. How's it going, Art?
It's going well, Ray. How about you?
It's going really well, I'm excited for this episode because we're going to let you kind of take the lead here and talk about something that you know quite a lot more about than the rest of us here on the ProductivityCast team, and that is the bullet journal. So I'll give you my couch bullet journaling expertise definition, and then I'm hoping that you can educate listeners on and us about more about what the bullet journal really is and how it works. So as I understand it, the bullet journal is a complete handwriting, paper and pen productivity system. The mechanism allows you to create a kind of an index at the beginning of a journal, and then you have your monthly calendar and then monthly task list, and you track your items that are calendar events and your task items. You perpetuate the existing items forward in your journal throughout the course of the journal itself, and obviously throughout the course of time, with a monthly review that allows you to transfer things from one month to the next and then from 1 week to the next as well. Is that the basics?
It's part of the basics, yeah. That's what some of the core functionality thinks about. But it's bullet journal is become or has become its own, I almost want to say, metaphor for productivity. I would put it almost analogous now with getting things done. And the reason why I say that is because it has developed a very rabid following around the benefits of it. Now, let me backtrack a little bit and explain. You were absolutely right on target. The bullet journal process was created, for all intents and purposes, as it stands, by a product designer in New York named Ryder Carroll. And if you have an opportunity, I highly recommend you go up to his website, bulletjournal.com. Has some great background on it and a great baseline understanding of the principles of what bullet journaling is about. But in a nutshell, it starts off as an analog tool. That's how it was originally designed, paper and pen. The idea is to capture everything that's going on. And we all know with all the different systems that we utilize, whether it's GTD, whether it's Todoist, whether it's paper, whatever, that one of the core principles of productivity is capture. The bullet journaling system encourages you to do that, and it mitigates one of the biggest weaknesses of analog systems, which is not only capturing things, but tracking things to execution, being able to follow them through and act on them and know what's been addressed, what hasn't, and what state it's at. So if you think about something at the most basic, if you want to understand how a bullet journal works, you can do this little exercise. Take a piece of paper, take a pen, write a note down on the paper, just one line about something that needs to be done. In front of that line, draw a small circle. You have now created the first step of your bullet journal, because that little circle now indicates to you that that is a thing that you need to do. It's like the classic to-do checkbox. But this is where we start to scale it up. Now you start to collect lots of those things. If we think about just going through the course of a day and we're capturing all these different things we have rattling through our head, well, some of those lines we write down are actionable items. They would get circles next to them. Other items aren't actionable, but we have to remember them. So in those cases, maybe we put a dot next to them. It indicates it's a note, but there's nothing we really need to do with it. Maybe it's an actionable item that we don't get to. So we're going to maybe draw a little arrow in front of it that indicates that it carries forward to another day. So you can see instead of just writing stuff down on our legal pads like we do during meetings, we can apply this bullet journal concept to start to capture what we're supposed to do with these items. Now, this is where we continue to scale this up. Because now, instead of having just this mass list of everything going on in the day, now we start to create pages within our journal to deal with different topic areas. Could be home activities, could be work activities, could be a particular project. But the technique is always the same, that consistency of notation. And even Ryder Carroll says it himself flat out on his website. There is no correct way to do this. There is no standard structure that you must follow. You design this the way that works best for you. I have a variant that I use because I use graph paper a lot that's completely different to these structures, but it works great for me. So as we start to build these lists and structures together, you can immediately see, again, another place where analog falls down. How do I know what's where? If I have them on separate sheets of paper, I have a list here, I have a list there, I have a list there. But if it's all in one bound journal, which is one of the operating pieces of this, how do I know what page it's on? How do I know what list is where? And that's where you introduce a table of contents, either at the beginning or at the end. So as you add new lists into your bullet journal, you add those pages into your table of contents, and you can then quickly reference from one section to the other. Now, that being said, it sounds fairly basic, and it is very basic. Honestly, anybody can sit down in about a half hour, start to do bullet journaling. If they do it that way, I would say they probably have about 2 weeks of effective time in bullet journaling before they start to run square into all the limitations of it. Things like, hey, this thing doesn't remind me what to do. How do I remember what has to be done? And that's one of the, I have to say, is one of the limitations of it. You have to look at it all the time. It is analog. It's up to you to provide the smarts and the interactivity.
There's a writer called Patrick Rohn, and he has begun talking about something he called a Dash Plus system that I understood when I moved to the bullet journal, that the bullet journal was, in a way, a better way to do that Dash Plus system. It allows to grow more. My problem was there is two big limitations for me in particular. One is my handwriting. I have an awful handwriting. My handwriting is so poorly that while I was in college, I had more than one class where teachers preferred to bring their personal laptop for me to type my test than for me to handwrite the test. That's how great my handwriting is. So that's where my first problem with the bullet journal comes. I can create it, but I can't read it ever again. So in a way, it's like a mystery productivity. And let's hope what gets done. Not great, by the way. My second problem comes exactly on what Art was coming. That was a part of the reminders. I'm an OmniFocus guy, and I love the fact that I can set reminders by location, by time, and by many other things. Plus, I can look at the things depending, but I don't want to go and look into a folder of things and try to find the stuff that I need to be remembered of. The other thing is, I think this is for a person who requires that attention, who, basically what is out of mind is out of sight is out of mind. I think it may be even better than a different system. That said, my experience was really short with the bullet journal, but it was interesting nonetheless.
I've never actually tried to implement it, but did enough reading to get an understanding. And it reminded me a lot of what I tried to do using two separate notebooks back in the 90s. Yeah, right. Before the Palm Pilot came out. I had a day runner, and I had lots of blank pages in it. And I also had a separate journal that had things like goals and progress towards goals. So I actually had two books that I think tried to get to where the bullet journal is trying to get.
My experience with the bullet journal is a brief implementation, and today a light use of it, in the sense that, like Art, I took the originator's concept of modifying it to the extreme, which is I'm a huge note taker, as people most know me for about Evernote, and I just really, really love the idea of using signifiers and other kinds of symbols in order to quickly take notes. You know, I was an early adopter in high school of Gregg simplified shorthand. I mean, I really love the idea of being able to capture very, very quickly what was happening in a real-time event. And, with my, I'm such a geek, but I had my copy of Robert's Rules of Order. I think at that time it was like the 6th or 7th edition. And now we're on like 14 or 15, I think. So, and I really enjoyed the idea of being able to be in a meeting and understand its mechanics and capture at the same time in a near real-time fashion. So this idea of the bullet journal, I really wanted to use components of it. And so now in my note-taking, at least my handwriting note-taking scenarios, I'm able to use those signifiers in kind of the same way. And so while I don't use the system, I use it in at least the concept, so that when I go from a meeting and I've taken handwritten notes, I'm now able to translate those back over to my digital world very quickly, right? And so if I don't have enough time to translate it, I can still quickly look at that page which I've scanned into Evernote, and now it's very easy for me to interpret, and really anyone who knows my systems, it's easy to interpret, to be able to say, okay, these are the things that need to be done. These are the calendar events, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Art, to talk a little bit about what people should do to get started in implementation. You covered a little bit about the idea of opening up a journal and just basically date and page number, and then starting to use the system. I know that, what's the name of the originator again? His name is escaping me.
It's Ryder Carroll.
Ryder Carroll, right. So Carroll goes ahead and he gives us this set of identifiers: a dot for a task, an X is X'd over the dot once you've completed it. All of these various things. A dash is a note correct for reference, and then a little circle is for an event record, basically a calendar, a appointment, or something that you need to do in that sense. And so I've modified that over time to provide me with some more meaning to those things. But can you tell us a little bit about how people should go about this, who's never kind of touched the system before and are interested in doing something like this?
Sure. There's a couple things that I want to touch back on a couple points that got raised by Augusto and Francis. One thing is, and it is, I don't want to say it's a barrier to entry, but the idea that your handwriting is a big part of this can be a barrier to entry, but it's not a functional barrier. It's a perceived barrier. So if you think that it's just not going to look good, I'm not going to be able to work with it, I'm not going to be able to read it, that could be very much an issue for some. For others, it may just be, I just don't like the way my handwriting looks. That's also true too. What I usually tell people related to that is the odds of you actually sharing your bullet journal with someone else is pretty small, unless you intentionally go through and participate in the bullet journaling communities that are out there and share photos of your layouts and all, which is a whole different thing I'll talk about a little later on. But at the most part, to get started, the easiest thing to start with is to think about just the capture piece. Put together, either using Ryder's definition, and it's important to understand that this is not new. Ryder Carroll did not come up with something that is completely new and innovative. This is highly derivative of other systems. This is highly derivative of things that have been around for literally hundreds of years. It's just a continuing evolution of it to deal with some of the issues around using an analog-based medium. But the easiest way to get started, again, is come up with 5 at the most basic symbols that you can use to start identifying things in your notes, and then just start writing things down. Now, usually the hesitation, and I'll address this later on, but usually the hesitation is, But I use a digital system. Why would I write it down on paper and then repurpose it? There are some strong arguments to doing that. People get concerned, oh, it's duplicate work. Not necessarily. I can argue against that pretty strongly because it's consolidation of work. If we think about the notes we take on a common basis, how many of those notes do you ever actually go back and look at again? How many of those notes are truly valuable? Or when you go back and you look at them, you go, yeah, I didn't need to know that, or this really wasn't actionable, or those really were condensed together. If you use this as a free-flowing method of capture, you can then evolve it into capture and process, then ultimately capture and process and report back to yourself. So to get started, start easy. Just start writing down the things that are popping into your mind, they're crossing your desk, crossing your email, and then start noting next to them. Yep, this is something I have to act on. This is something I have to remember. This is something that has to go on the calendar.
That you said, I think, is really, really important. As much as I love technology, there is something to said about the impression people have when you get in a meeting with an electronic device, even if you're taking notes, even if you take notes better than them, where some of these principles that you just mentioned, Hart, are really interesting, because when you go to that notebook and you use those principles of notation, and to the point that then you can go back to those notes, and instead of try to decipher what happened to my handwriting, okay, you can now go and look at the notes and find out the 5, 6, 7, 10, 1 items at glance, and then remember that item. There is a higher probability that you will than if you need to decipher 2 or 3 pages of notes. Well, that's one of the things that I got out of there. I don't have the index because I try to process the notes and disappear them, but I got the notation, and there is a couple of things, I get one for ideas, I get one for actions, I get one for stuff that got delegated. And that allows me to look at the scribbles on the page that are hard to read, but I know exactly what are the 3 to 5 points that I need to remember.
It's an interesting point when you think about the taking of the notes, and I'm going to tangent a little bit here. If you think about most business meetings, if you bring your laptop into the business meeting and somebody at the table is sitting there and talking, and you find something that they said interesting and engaging, and you want to remember that, and you type it in, the person who said it doesn't know if you're capturing what they said, if you're responding to an email, if you're looking up something on Amazon. There is no sense of connection there. However, if you're sitting there listening and they say something and you reach over, open a notebook, pick up a pen and write it down, immediately they get a psychological reinforcement that said, oh, they just took note of what I said. There's a connection point there. And it's something that often gets lost.
I agree with you, regardless of one of the things I've been noticing since I got the iPad Pro with a pencil. I struggle with what you mentioned forever, because I'm a digital guy. And what I discovered when I got the iPad Pro with a pencil is that electronic barrier, when you are using the pencil, people is, oh, okay, he had a digital notebook, but it's still a notebook, and people don't feel that rejection towards the laptop or the phone or even the iPad.
Exactly. There is still that connection to the physical world. It separates from the digital. Now, that being said, and I will readily admit, I use bullet journaling primarily for capture. I do not typically use it for processing because I have digital systems that I utilize for processing. So if you balance that out and think about those pieces, you don't have to fully commit to any one aspect of this to make it work for you.
So, Art, I had a couple questions about, as we continue on the conversation about implementation, and so first, because I'm a mechanics guy, right? I'm really into the nitty gritty here. So here goes. My thoughts here are on, how do you choose a length of notebook, the type of paper? You said you use mostly graph paper, right? So you like a grid of some kind. How do you choose a pen or pencil or pencils or colored ink or those kinds of things. And like, how do you, what are some of the decision points? What are some of the questions you need to ask yourself in order to get to that point of deciding on some of these fundamental pieces of the actual physical imprint that you're going to be carrying with you day to day?
Well, I want to say that's almost the secret sauce of something like bullet journaling. There's a threshold that you cross very quickly. A lot of people are very much grab the legal pad out of the common drawer and grab a pencil and just start writing notes down. And that works. That'll work for anybody. When you have people who have a little bit more of a passion around analog, such as notebooks and pens and things, now that becomes the engaging part. It's not so much the fact that you're using bullet journaling to capture things, but it starts to evolve into a much more personalized system. I said I use graph paper, but I'm sitting here right now with a large A5 format reporter's notebook spread out. Sometimes ballpoint pen, sometimes fountain pen. Does it matter? Well, it matters to me, to whatever is going to encourage me at that point to continue the capture process, to continue to utilize the system. And in early days, I wanted consistency. So I was always using the same notebook, same pen. I wanted that visual. And I realized why? Why restrict and limit? And that's when you start to look at, if you search Google Images, for example, for bullet journaling, you look at some of these bullet journals that people have put together and they're works of art. I mean, people are spending hours personalizing and decorating and integrating their own visuals into bullet journals. And for hardcore, pure productivity people and mechanical people like us, we look at that and we go, good Lord, how much time are you spending on doing that and not getting anything else done? But if we take the step back, we realize that what they're doing is reinforcing that engagement. So when you ask me, what's the best notebook to use? What's the right one to use? It took a long time before Ryder Carroll even offered a, quote, sanctioned notebook. Use whatever you want. Use whatever's convenient. I do recommend, though, if you're trying to make this truly capture and process, you're going to want to get a notebook and stick with it for a while. I would say 30 days. Don't feel bad about changing notebooks around. And if you find a notebook is not working for you, don't struggle through it because you're only making it painful for yourself and you're creating resistance to your own system. But once you find a notebook and a pen combination you like, stick with it. Work with it for 30 days. And if you don't like it after 30 days, switch out to something else. Keep switching out. Keep it fresh. So, unfortunately, there's no straightforward answer to the question, but that's actually the right answer. You find one you work with best.
That was the answer I was expecting.
Okay. I mean, if I look at the different things, the different variants of notebooks I have right now, I've got, like I said, the reporter's notebook. I have a Moleskine notebook. I have a composition notebook that's graph paper, and I have a traveler's notebook. All of them have different variants of bullet journal in them right now because they're what I use at any given time. I know all of those sources will flow into my core systems. So whatever I feel like using, that's the one I'm most likely to use.
And doubling back on your thoughts about, this being an evolution of things. I mean, I've been doing a lot of this stuff thanks to Franklin Covey training many, many years ago. And so again, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, as I was thinking back on my comments about Greg simplified shorthand, learning that was basically learning how to use signifiers, right? And learning how to use symbology in order to be able to capture faster. And dissimilar to Augusto, my handwriting is absolutely beautiful. No, but
I'm not surprised.
And their modesty too, I may say. It is good that their handwriting is beautiful as well as their modesty. So,
no, actually, I had this amazing, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I had a penmanship teacher in, I think about third grade, and he just ingrained in all of us I went through the New York City public school systems, and remarkable teacher, and he just taught us penmanship. And I mean, I have always written in longhand when I tried, I mean, I can chicken scratch, like the best of us. But when I actually focus on writing, the fluidity of my script is pristine. The real problem with that, though, is that it's not picked up by OCR technology, optical character recognition technology, and so it's good as useless to the computer to be able to understand what I've written. A lot of these systems, I think bullet journals is a good example of them. If you are willing to write like that, you can actually go ahead and use some of this in OCR fashion, digitizing some of this data for capture later. And this brings me to the writer Carol has developed a bullet journal companion iOS application. So if you are on the Apple ecosystem, there is an iPhone app that's available that allows you to archive your notebooks. And I just wanted to touch on this point, and Art, you probably have some comments about this once I'm done. I had a client who isn't obviously using Evernote, and I was helping him implement Evernote, and he wanted something like the bullet journal to be able to capture his prior notebooks and to be able to archive them. And so he actually used Evernote to be able to do that, and it ended up being very easy to do what the bullet journal companion app is, and do that in across the Evernote platform. And I presume you could do this with OneNote, and you can do this with many other tools that allow you to capture images, tag, so that you can create a taxonomy and otherwise. So just keep that in mind, that you're able to bridge the digital divide from the paper side by just utilizing a little bit of technology. But do you have any experience with the bullet journal companion app?
No, I haven't. I haven't worked with it, and honestly, that's been a conscious thing, because it's going to sound a little bizarre. I have found that apps built around existing systems tend to diminish the flexibility of the system themselves. So when you look at something like GTD, you look at something like bullet journaling, they have an open architecture to them. And by its very nature, a tool that's defined to implement that architecture puts restrictions on it. I'm sure it has some fantastic capabilities, but it's the adaptation of that architecture that I find makes the systems most powerful. So honestly, I have not consciously looked at it as of yet. Some point I may, and I'm sure it has some great strengths. I mean, Ryder would not have attached his name to it if it did not. But I would caution anyone that you don't need to use the app to be able to do this. And you're absolutely right talking about the archiving process. That's one of the default things that I do. When a notebook fills up, and they all fill up, we always have the eternal question, what do I do with it? I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff in there. How do I get to it? What do I use it? Do I keep it on a bookshelf? Do I throw it away? What I normally do is I use OneNote. I will go through and use Office Lens, and I will scan every page in the notebook, and then I put the notebook on a shelf. Do I need to keep it? No. Will I probably ever look at it again? Probably not. But I can count 20 times where I've gone back and said, you know what, there was something. I remember there was something, and turns out I didn't get it into my digital system, but I could go back through my notes and go through my notebooks and flip through the times and say, oh, there it is. That was the code number I needed. This was the phone number I was looking for. I don't know why I didn't put it in there, but it was in there. About the OCR technology, you're absolutely right. If you want to take the analog and make it truly digitally manipulative, then you have to be able to read the characters. So nice cursive writing, nice script writing, like I have as well. OCR doesn't like that. It won't work with it well because it can't read it. So if you know you're going to be going down that path, you have to work with the limitations of the technology. So honestly, you're going to have to print.
I agree on that. I have also used Evernote. That's actually for what I use Evernote. I have never used Evernote for any other, I know Ray's super active on Evernote. For me, Evernote is a digital file cabinet. And what is cool is I can throw stuff at that and don't worry too much. And sometimes I get lucky, and then if there is text on a keyboard, then the OCR will find it eventually. But that's what I do with those. A lot of those notes, when I'm done with them, if they have, if there are notes for a meeting or notes that are critical, I just select them on my digital notebook and forward them to Evernote in a PDF format, and then that way I can go back and find it. And I agree with you that all the notes I have taken maybe has been 5 to 10 that I have needed to go back to Evernote and find that critical piece of information. But those 5 to 10 times, I have been so grateful that I put those notes in there that it's worth it to keep sending the notes there.
We keep talking about this being, task items and to-do items and punch list type of things. Bullet journaling is broader than that. As you have thoughts during a day, you come across quotes, you come across whatever. It's an open architecture system, and that's one of the benefits of keeping the notebooks. I'll go through during a day, and if I hear a quote on something or somebody says something or I read an article somewhere, and I'll make a note of it in my notebook. Could I go throw it in OneNote? Absolutely. It probably happened just as quickly. But I may not see a value for it, but I still capture it. So don't think it's limited to just hardcore productivity stuff. This is literally your external brain on paper.
And many times what you capture in digital, because it's so easy to capture, becomes a junk drawer, right? You could just capture anything. And when you write it down, there's kind of a gravitas to spending the time and effort to write that down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was sort of sitting back listening a bit because I know that there are core principles that are at work, whether you're using paper or digital analog. The core principles around capturing are the ones that Art has been emphasizing. Is that the core principle is that if you have a piece of information that you need to use later, you need to find a very fast way to grab a hold of it, and at least fix it in some place that's outside of your memory. And then the other parts that the bullet journal also addresses, the scheduling, the action items, the tasks, the calendar, and so forth, also follow first principles, because what I love about the system is that it allows you to customize your layout so that you can follow the first principles in a way that meets your specific needs. At the same time, there is a paper, which is that paper fades, it burns, it gets wet, it gets lost, it gets stolen. It's an unstable medium compared to the cloud, for example. So it works really well. You guys probably remember the times when we used to have a book of phone numbers, and maybe you had a diary in the front, but you at least had a little black book, and it worked fine. Maybe for 100 entries. And then you ran out of the A's and then the S's and then the T's, and then gradually you had to a bigger black book, or you had to get a new one and cross out some of the old addresses. But the problem with a little black book is that it doesn't scale. It works fine for small numbers. But when you get up to really big numbers, it stops working as well as for example, a calendar on Google Calendar that's cross-platform on all your devices and available everywhere. Which is a fine solution for that scale. And my sense of any paper-based system is that it's fine for a certain scale. But once you need to go above that scale, like for example, once you need to assure and absolutely have your information with you, once you need reminders, which are an indication that you have at a very high premium, so you have to use reminders. When it becomes too cumbersome to transfer information from one book-based system to another, and when the threat of losing the information becomes too high, or it becomes too hard to keep transferring. Gusto on a prior podcast said he has 900 tasks. Managing 900 tasks by paper, I don't think is really an option. So I believe it's a scaling issue here that we haven't really talked about yet.
I want to jump in on this because I'm going to take it from the exact opposite side of the equation. You're right. There is a scaling issue when it comes to paper. When you have 1,000 contacts, you're not going to manage them all in a notebook. Then you have to say, why do I have 1,000 contacts? Out of that 1,000 contacts, how many do I actually need to interact with on a frequent basis? Because scale and immediacy are tied together. Our digital systems allow us to deal with volumes of information. But a lot of that information is not of immediate urgent need. It doesn't need to be directly accessible. And the challenge of information being more secure in the cloud, I've lost stuff just as easily in the cloud as I have on paper. And if I go somewhere and I know I'm going to need something critically, the potential of it not being accessible on my phone due to connectivity or whatever, I will write it down just because it's the being prepared. So I wouldn't go exclusive one side or the other. There are clearly limitations, but there are clearly strengths. And I would say you want to balance the spheres of access with the scale of what you're trying to manage.
I agree that there is a balance for many. However, at the high end, the person who is the 900 task person, there is not really much of a balance from my point of view.
Right, but okay, let's look at it realistically though. If we take the 900 task example, who truly has 900 tasks? What they have is they have multiple projects with sub-collections of tasks. If they don't, they're not managing their tasks properly. I mean, I think we can agree to that. And nobody should have 900 tasks in a single task list. So if you subdivide them down into truly executable sets, you're now falling into sublists within a larger collection. Well, those sublists within a larger collection, if I throw the analog piece out and use something straightforward like OneNote, those are all pages within a section that have to-do tags on the items. 900 tasks, all subsetted up, but it works the same way. It's the same methodology, whether it's digital or analog. It's how can I manage that? It's not as fast. It's not as easy to manipulate as the digital space because those are ephemeral, but it does give us the same capabilities.
I don't want to put too much a finer point on it.
No. This is the struggle point that people have, and it's good that we go through and talk through this, because when people look at these two types of things, analog and digital at the higher end, they say, where is this going to fall apart for me? And as soon as it's going to fall apart for me, I don't even want to start going down that path. So they have to know how far down can they go before they're going to hit issues.
I was doing some research on bullet journal and the mention of scale. It didn't come into any of the videos I was watching or anything I read. Sort of that yes, this will work for you up to a point. And even just the danger of losing the information is a whole nother. If you're working on something mission critical, then having it on paper is so. There's in the discussion. I don't hear here's the point at which that you need to consider a transition, and I think that transition is a bit like going from a little black book to going to something more robust. I think it's a consideration everyone has to bring into the party, which is what I think you're saying.
Yeah, I'll give you two clear delineation lines for transition. One, anytime there's more than one person involved. The one thing bullet journaling does not do well in my experience is collaborate in any way, shape, or form, because it's your notebook. You're not passing around. You have one copy of it. Second, and probably the less tangible but the more impactful, are highly dynamic activities. If you're dealing with something that is in flux, it becomes difficult because you're constantly rewriting and changing what's in the journal itself. There's a third one that I'll throw on top of the list that I've actually come up with a solution for me, but it's not part of the native bullet journaling structure, and that's tracking process, not just action. If we think about a lot of things that we have to do when we're capturing, a lot of times it's not just is it done or is it not done. It's in various stages of completion. The bullet journal itself, by definition, doesn't really handle that particularly well, because if we think about just our little circle indicating status, there's only so many things you can do with a circle. So you have those transitive states now where digital systems lend themselves to that flexibility. So you're absolutely right. There are scalability caps. There are implementation caps that you have. There's actually another cap, and since it's 4 guys on the podcast, it's what I call the pocket cap, because we don't have purses to carry these in. So if we're talking about something at work, we carry it around in our briefcase and things like that. But what if you're going out for a run? What if you're just going to the store? Are you carrying your A5 reporter's notebook with you everywhere? Well, if you have a bag, sure, but I don't carry a bag. If it doesn't fit in my pockets, it doesn't go with me. So how do you scale it down as well as up? These are all decisions that you have to make if you're going to use an analog-based system. But I don't want people to get discouraged and say, well, because it can't do everything, I can't use it. That is absolutely not the case.
There is 2 things. One is, as we were talking on the Black book, I was laughing because it reminded me of my grandmother, who has, that was my first experience with that Black book that Francis was referring to, where you will ask, Grandma, where is our phone number? I know, I already look for Art. I already look for Gelwitz. Where is, look at on the P. On the P, yes, because he will be on the P of Productivity Podcast. So that was the first thing that I thought about that. But the other thing, agreeing with the limitations that you are saying, Francis, I think one of the things that the bullet journal does to address that is the part of the future. One of the things that I think the bullet journal, and the reason I look into it, does really well is the current notebook is not designed to cover the rest of your life. That the digital version, in a way, is, hey, you can throw anything at here, make 1 million projects, 9 million tasks, and I will handle it. The idea of the bullet journal, as I understand it at least, it's more of a focus tool. So yes, you may have 1 million projects, but the reality is on the next 30 days, you only may be able to do this. That's part 1. And the part 2 is, while you are doing only the things you're really going to be able to realistically, make sure you are capturing everything else. So when you go and recalibrate, you can have all that information in there. For me, my system, my 900 task, proverbial 900 task, lives in OmniFocus. That said, I have a piece of paper, digital, where goes the top most important things that I need to make sure move forward today. And I try to limit the amount of information I put in there, not with great success, but I try. Okay. And what that thing does is give me the ability to focus. What I think a proper implementation of bullet journal can do, if you're willing to carry that notebook, is allows you to give a lot more focus than a digital thing that, then it doesn't have any limits. As much as the limitations, we can look at all the negative of those limitations, I think those limitations also play for the positive, because in digital, if we print all our digital systems, realistically, there is no way we're going to finish that. Okay. But what the bullet journal allows you to do is to limit where you are going to focus, what you are going to do to move forward. And I think that's really positive.
I agree. I think that the limitations can be designed in with sort of enough creativity or with enough understanding and appreciation of the power of bullet journal. I think it could be translated into software by someone who understands these limitations and builds them into the software, so that you don't end up throwing everything in the kitchen sink and then therefore not managing it's a design problem as opposed to a benefit of paper.
Well, okay. But see, here's the thing about that, though. we look at designing software tools to implement these systems, and I go back to what I mentioned earlier. It's the infinite flexibility of this type of an analog-based system that is its greatest strength. And software, by its very nature, has rails on it. It has to fall within specific criteria. So one of the things that you'll see when you start to look at it, and I've written articles on it, on implementing bullet journal in tools such as OneNote and Evernote and other systems. There's always accommodations that have to be made. There's always adjustments that have to be compensated for. Yes, you can mitigate some of the limitations, but you're also giving up something in the same equation. For example, if I take Todoist, my absolute favorite task tool, if I use that to implement a bullet journal-based system, which I can do, one of the things I'm going to give up is the ability to draw a picture. I can't do an illustration in Todoist. It just won't do it. So then I have to look at a different tool. Could I do it in OneNote? Yes, I could do it if I have the right pieces. So there's always that give and take. And if we always look at the consideration of what is the underlying principle of this type of a system, and that is to make it your own, I have yet to find a software-based solution that is that open of an architecture that it works for everybody without an issue.
And to add to that, because agreeing with Hart 100% on this, the problem is not can you make a piece of software that will fit all Francis needs? Yes. Can you make a piece of software that will work for everybody? No. And if you think about getting things done, okay, as a principles, okay, I read the first Getting Things Done, the book the first time, I think it was around 2001 or 2. Okay, so it's been 16 years. And for 16 years, I've been reading about the perfect piece of software that is coming, or the perfect piece of software, the perfect implementation, how this software does better. Well, I have been sticking with OmniFocus. Is OmniFocus the perfect? No. It's perfect for the way I have implemented Getting Things Done. Are better software out there? Probably. If you change the way it's implemented, yes. If I will need to start adding PCs and Android tablets to my equation, OmniFocus is broken immediately because you can only use it on Mac and iOS platforms. So I think for the bullet journal, it's exactly the same thing. The software will be perfect for your implementation, but I don't think you can make. While on paper, you have such an incredible flexibility that then you can make almost anything work.
Now, I'll flip around. Let me take Francis's side for a second. I just want to... That incredible flexibility can actually derail the entire system in no time at all. Because if you look, like I said, look up the images, a lot of people won't even start with the system because they realize they will never make it as pretty as what they see on Pinterest. It will never look as good. They don't feel they are artistic enough, which has nothing to do with bullet journaling. But they can completely derail it because there isn't that structure. So yeah, Francis, you're dead on with the fact that a lot of people like the structure of a digitally based system, and that's what makes them productive. And an analog system that is basically a pen and a blank piece of paper is completely out of their wheelhouse. Why start? You guys are supposed to be experts. Show me what I'm supposed to do. And this is not going to do that. This puts a lot of the onus on the person using the system.
The reason why I don't journal anymore on paper, and I mentioned on a prior podcast how I left my beautiful journal on a plane once, and that was the end of it. And after that, I said, never again will I ever have that happen in my entire life. So if you see wherever you like to store it as you're unwilling to put up with it ever being lost, then you have to migrate to more robust solutions. It's just a matter of course. And that's one of the and again, I in my mind, it's not a matter of taste, whether someone likes something or not. I believe that it's a matter of volume. That as the volumes increase, as the volume of information you're trying to manage increases, there's a it's a bit like the example that I gave, but it's also a bit like trying to dig a hole. You could use a shovel for a really small hole. It's fine. It's a perfect implement. But if you're going to build something that's a mile wide, you need heavy duty lifting equipment and you need tractors and whatnot. Have to have redundancy.
You're dead on with that. There's no question about it. I mean, if I look at my system, the paper part of it is I want to say it's the piece that plays with the right half of my brain. It's the one that allows me to free-flowingly, creatively come up with whatever I need to do, tasks, sketch things through, put those pieces together. Actual execution, I move into a digital system because I know the digital system has its strengths and doesn't have the weaknesses of the analog piece. Can you do one or the other exclusively? Absolutely. I mean, we've all said this numerous times. Try it. See if it works for you. If it doesn't work, change it. Give yourself the option. But don't think that, like I said, don't get scared about bullet journaling when you look it up online, because it is this massive community of what can be very expensive purchases. We think about online solutions and we start to say, oh man, that's $2 a month. That's $3 a month. We're talking notebooks here that are $20 a notebook in some cases, traveler's notebooks that are leather bound that are way beyond. I mean, this can completely blow itself out of the proportions when we talk about an investment into a system. But as Ray mentioned, this goes back to the old days of things like daytimers and Franklin planners. You know, whoever had the nicest leather daytimer sitting at the meeting table was the person in charge. It is some old school thinking at times.
What I'm hearing from the discussion is that bullet journal is kind of a double-edged sword, like anything else that is, that has to toggle the digital paper world today that we live in, right? Some people are digital, some people are paper. And so the bullet journal allows for really great amounts of focus. You can really filter down and boil down the most important things by using paper and pen. This is a personal productivity system, and I think a lot of people misrepresent that which is a team productivity solution or a group productivity solution. This is an individual productivity system, very similar to getting things done. I mean, the reality is that getting things done is about personal productivity, how you manage your own productivity, not others. It's very difficult to even implement GTD in a team environment unless you have a quite amount of influence over that team. Volume matters. The dynamism of projects and the movement of tasks matter. If you need reminders, this is not probably the system for you if you don't check in with your bullet journal. And then, of course, backup, redundancy, and access, right? A paper book, like a novel, is great because it doesn't need a battery. But if you lose your book, it's gone, right? It's not really something that you can replace very easily, and you can't access it from anywhere as you can with things in the cloud. So I think this has been a really great discussion on the bullet journal, but also how paper digital hybrid productivity really needs to be addressed and looked at. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, this is one of those, those perpetual things that I'm always fascinated with. So over at the Idea Pump, which is my site, there's a bullet journaling resource page, which has links to various things across the web, articles I've written, things that are that will help think through the process. I've lumped it all into that page. So it's all over at the ideapump.com, and just look in the navigation for bullet journal reference. And we'll include it in the show notes as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you have a question or comment about this cast, something we discussed in this cast, or otherwise about personal productivity? Go ahead and visit productivitycast.net/contact and let us know. We'll be happy to talk to you or talk about it on a future cast. Thanks to Augusto, Francis, and Art for joining me here on ProductivityCast. You can find this episode's show notes with all the links to the things we talked about and how to subscribe to the show at productivitycast.net/035, the episode number 035. And if you could, head over to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you are and give us a rating or review. It helps us open up to a new community of listeners. So thank you for that. That brings us to the close for ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. Here's to your productive life.
That's it for this Productivity Cast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.